My mission is to teach history through art and to make people think more critically about false narratives. I'm Jim McMurtry, and welcome to my classroom. My name's Jim McMurtry. I'm a teacher. I'd like to talk to you about, perhaps we'd call it a lesson, about an iconic work of art and one that speaks volumes about the official narrative on Indian residential schools. It's by a Cree artist by the name of Kent Monkman, and I think he's very talented. But I don't think his intention with this work called The Scream was intended to be anything less than propagandistic because it's not accurate history. And it's very important. It's very important in this reason because I think most Canadians now who are following this issue realize that there are dead children. There weren't teachers, nuns with guns, and other teachers that were going around slaughtering children. I don't think people believe anymore that it was a bad idea to have schools for the kids. So all the talk about culture genocide and so forth, I don't really think that weighs on people anymore. But what does is the idea that children were taken away from their parents. They were ripped from their mother's arms. And that's what this painting does. And I use the word iconic because it represents what's in people's heads about these schools. Why would they have done that? Schools, sure, but why not build them on the reserve? Why not have the kids go home at the end of school like other kids? And so allow me just to talk about this painting and preface my comments by saying, well, these schools were mostly in the wilderness. They were in the areas of Canada to the north and the west where there were far fewer settlements. And some of the bands, some of the First Nations were nomadic and they were too small in number and there was no ability to provide a school where they lived. So they had to go somewhere to go to school. And that's still the case in Canada today. And as is compulsory education. Compulsory education came in from non-Indigenous children in 1791. They waited 49 years before it was made compulsory for Indigenous children in 1920, and even then it was rarely enforced, and it wasn't enforced by an Indian by the RCMP, but by an Indian agent, and that was the supervisor on the reserve and made sure that government policies were followed. So seeing in this picture, you see RCMP officers, you see teachers out gathering kids, and maybe just talk a little bit about that. And first of all, you can see that the dress of a lot of the kids is rather modern. And you wonder, well, why would that be? Why would Kent Monkman do that? Well, I think from my understanding is that he's believing that the statement he's making through his expert artistry is that it's still relevant to today. So it brings the past into the present. The contemporary clothing is the idea that the issues at play are still contemporary, the bad things are still happening to these children. A few other things very quickly. You notice on the right hand side of the painting, there's an RCMP officer with a rifle, and then on the left hand side, there's a man on the ground. So the suggestion is that the man has been shot. Perhaps it's a father, perhaps someone who was trying to defend his children. But again, it was the Indian agent that did this, and the parents signed the kids up by signing an application form. There were some cases where the kids were forcibly taken, but they were forcibly taken because it was deemed in the child's interest, because they were orphans, because they were children who were being abused in the house. Children didn't have the necessities of life and so forth. So, and that's the case today in Alberta. Here we are in 2024. If a child doesn't go to school, the school authorities try and do something about it, particularly the guidance counselors. If that doesn't work, then the police can get involved and they can put the child in probation. If that doesn't work, the child in Alberta today can go for up to 30 days in jail. So again, our society has made a decision consensually a long time ago that the best place for children to be is in school. And so anyhow, it's just not as it's being depicted here. A few other things I'd like to know. The children didn't go until age 7. So when a priest in the front right of the painting is carrying a baby with wearing diapers, you know that's inaccurate. When a mother is holding a very large child on the very left-hand side of the screen, you know that too is unlikely. And mothers wouldn't react that way, of course, because mothers back then and mothers today want their 7-year-olds out of the house for much of the day. I know that. I'm a grandparent of 5 grandsons, so I'm not going to be convinced that people are unhappy with the fact that for parents, schools are in part a daycare service. There's some other things that are interesting and to briefly note in this painting. One of them is you've got 3 teenagers at the back right who are running away, and that's maybe it's a way, it's an illusion, a visual illusion to the secret path. And that was Gord Downey's book and the idea that kids were running away from these schools and in some cases, and it did happen, and ended in tragedy. And that's why many people know the story of Charlie or Channy Wenjack, who ran away and didn't make it home. And some people, of course, that book is in many classes right across Canada. And even the Charlie Wenjack story is not true because Charlie never ran away. Charlie went with 2 school friends to visit their uncle at a fishing lodge. So, and then there's the orange shirt, and the girl who's responsible for that, who's featured in it and is giving speaking to us today, is a older woman, Phyllis Webstad. She never even went to an Indian residential school. So I guess this is my lesson for those who maybe don't know as much as others about residential school, or as maybe there's very few of us who know a lot about residential schools. It was an area of interest for me, and I did a doctorate at the University of Toronto in the subject, and that is that the goal wasn't to do anything that was counter to the interests of Indigenous people. Education is the right, it was back then, and it is today. So when you think back on residential schools, not only on September 30th, which is also known as Orange Shirt Day, I'd love people to think of this painting and see it as, again, as art, but not as history.